The galaxy was dying, and Ambassador Keth-7 knew it. The crystal being stood before the great viewing screen on the emergency command station, watching another star system disappear into darkness. Where the Kepler colonies had thrived just days ago, now only empty space remained. No debris, no radiation signatures, nothing at all, as if billions of lives had simply been erased from existence. The Void Swarm had done this. They always left nothing behind. "Sir, we're receiving the final transmission from the Luminal Home Systems," reported Commander Vex, his voice crackling through the translation device. The energy-based luminals had been one of the most advanced species in the galaxy. Their technology could manipulate matter at the quantum level. They had seemed unstoppable. The transmission played across the command center. Ambassador Keth-7 watched in horror as beings of pure light fought desperately against dark, writhing masses that seemed to absorb everything they touched. The luminal warriors fired their most powerful energy weapons, but the creatures simply grew larger, adapting to each attack within minutes. "They're learning from us," came the panicked voice of a luminal commander. "Every weapon we use, every tactic we try, they counter it faster than we can think. They're not just killing us, they're becoming us, and then they're becoming something worse." The transmission cut to static. Keth-7 felt his crystalline body dim with despair. The luminals had fallen in less than a week. Before them, the mighty Nixari Empire had lasted only days against the swarm. The technology-dependent Zephyrians had been consumed in hours. Every major civilization in the galaxy had the same story. The Void Swarm would appear at the edge of a system, a writhing mass of biomechanical nightmares that seemed to be part machine, part living creature, and part something else entirely. They would study their prey, learning and adapting to every defense, every weapon, every strategy. Then they would strike and nothing would remain. "How many systems have we lost?" Keth-7 asked, though he dreaded the answer. 43% of all inhabited worlds," Vex replied quietly. "The outer rim is completely gone. The middle territories are falling faster than we can evacuate them. At this rate, the core worlds have maybe 2 months before the swarm reaches them." Keth-7 turned away from the viewing screen. The emergency command station housed refugees from dozens of species, all the greatest minds and leaders who had managed to escape the swarm's advance. They had tried everything. Quantum weapons, dimensional shields, time distortion fields, biological warfare, even attempts at communication. Nothing worked. "Have we heard anything from the Zenithari research teams?" he asked, grasping for hope. Commander Vex's tentacles drooped. "The research station at Zenithar Prime went dark 6 hours ago. They were working on a new type of energy weapon that could theoretically adapt faster than the swarm. We think they may have had a breakthrough, but..." He didn't need to finish. The swarm had found them first. Keth-7 walked to his private chambers, feeling older than his 700 years. As ambassador for the Galactic Confederation, he was supposed to find solutions to build bridges between species, to maintain peace and cooperation. But how could he build bridges when there would soon be no one left to connect? He sat at his desk and activated his personal data archive. Somewhere in the vast collection of galactic records, there had to be something they had missed, some species they hadn't contacted, some technology they hadn't tried, some strategy that might work. Hours passed as he searched through files. He reviewed every known civilization, every first contact report, every technological innovation. The results were always the same. Every species that could help was either already fighting and losing, or had been consumed entirely. Then he found something strange. Deep in the restricted files, marked with warnings and quarantine notices, was a system designation, Sol. The file was flagged with a classification he had never seen before. Extreme hazard, Deathworld survivors. Curious, despite his despair, Keth-7 opened the file. The first entry made him pause. "Warning. This species has been classified as unsuitable for standard diplomatic contact. Approach with extreme caution. Recommend indefinite quarantine protocols." He read further. The species called themselves humans, and they came from a world that the survey teams had labeled as actively hostile to life. The planet's surface was covered in poisonous gas that other species couldn't breathe. It had extreme temperature variations, massive storms, deadly radiation from its star, natural disasters that could level entire continents. But somehow, impossibly, intelligent life had not just survived there but thrived. The survey reports were filled with disturbing observations. The humans were described as aggressive, unpredictable, and capable of surviving in conditions that would kill most galactic species within minutes. They seemed to actually enjoy dangerous situations. Their entertainment involved simulated combat, extreme physical challenges, and stories about overcoming impossible odds. Most disturbing of all, they had developed technology by fighting each other. While other species had advanced through cooperation and peaceful research, humans had created their greatest innovations during periods of warfare. They had somehow turned their violent nature into a tool for progress. The file contained a note from the original survey team leader. These beings are clearly intelligent and may possess advanced technology, but they are too dangerous for contact with civilized species. Their mindset is fundamentally incompatible with galactic peace. Recommend permanent isolation. Keth 7 read the report again, then a third time. A terrible, desperate idea began to form in his mind. What if their greatest weakness was actually their greatest strength? What if the very things that made humans unsuitable for galactic civilization were exactly what was needed to fight the swarm? The Void Swarm adapted to logical, predictable responses. It learned from rational tactics and technological solutions. Every species had approached the problem the same way, with their best technology, their most advanced weapons, their most brilliant strategies, and every species had failed. But what if someone approached the problem differently? What if someone fought not with logic and advanced technology, but with the kind of chaotic, unpredictable methods that had evolved on a world where survival itself was a daily battle? Keth 7 stood up quickly, his crystal form brightening with the first hope he had felt in weeks. It was insane. It was desperate. It went against every principle of galactic civilization. It might be their only chance. He rushed back to the command center and activated the long-range communication array. The Sol system was far beyond the current quarantine zone, in a region that the swarm hadn't reached yet. If the humans were still alive, if they were willing to help, if they could somehow succeed where advanced civilizations had failed, Commander Vex, prepare a priority transmission to the Sol system, he ordered. Sir, but that system is under quarantine protocols. Contact is strictly forbidden. The quarantine protocols assumed we would have a galaxy left to protect, Keth 7 replied grimly. Send the message on all frequencies. Full disclosure of our situation, tell them what we're facing, and ask if they're willing to help. As the message transmitted across space toward Earth, Keth 7 whispered a prayer to whatever powers might still be listening. They had asked the most advanced species in the galaxy for help, and it hadn't been enough. Now they were asking the most dangerous species they knew of. The response came back faster than expected. The message was short, direct, and unlike any diplomatic communication Keth 7 had ever received. Received your transmission. Situation understood. United Earth Defense Corps is mobilizing. ETA to your position, 6 days. Hold the line until we get there. We're coming. For the first time in months, Ambassador Keth 7 allowed himself to hope. The human fleet arrived at Crystalis exactly when they said they would, and nothing about them matched what the survivors expected. Ambassador Keth 7 stood in the observation deck of the refugee command station, watching the approaching ships with growing confusion. The vessel designs were crude by galactic standards. Instead of the elegant curves and energy matrices that characterized advanced technology, the human ships looked like metal boxes covered in weapons and armor plating. Are those chemical rockets? Asked Commander Vex, his voice filled with disbelief. I believe so, Keth 7 replied, studying the energy signatures and nuclear reactors. Some kind of fusion drive system. It's also primitive. The lead ship was massive, easily the size of a Nexari battlecruiser, but it looked like it had been built in sections and welded together. Burn marks and hull patches suggested it had seen combat before. Instead of the smooth, seamless construction of galactic vessels, the ship looked functional and tough, like it was designed to take damage and keep fighting. Incoming transmission from the human fleet, reported the communications officer. Put it through, Keth 7 ordered. The screen flickered to life, showing a human female in what appeared to be military clothing. She had short dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Behind her, Keth 7 could see other humans moving efficiently around what looked like a primitive but functional command center. Ambassador Keth 7, I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Corps ship Indomitable. We received your distress call and we're here to help. Keth 7 stepped forward. Captain Chen, we are grateful beyond words for your response. However, I must warn you, the enemy you're facing has defeated the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. They adapt to any technology, any weapon, any strategy. Perhaps you should review our tactical data before engaging. Captain Chen smiled, and there was something in that expression that reminded Keth 7 uncomfortably of the reports about humans enjoying dangerous situations. Already did that on the way here. Interesting opponent. My tactical officer has some questions, though. Another human appeared on screen, a tall man with calculating eyes. Commander Jake Morrison, Tactical Analysis. Your data shows the swarm adapts to energy-based weapons, quantum manipulation, and advanced defensive systems. What about kinetic weapons? Old-fashioned projectiles, explosives, that kind of thing? Commander Vex answered, We haven't used such primitive methods in thousands of years. Energy weapons are far more efficient and precise. Efficient and precise, Morrison repeated thoughtfully. But the swarm learned to counter them. What about inefficient and imprecise? What about weapons that are basically just rocks thrown really, really hard? Keth 7 felt a chill in his crystalline structure. You mean to use crude kinetic weapons against an enemy that has defeated quantum-level technology? Sometimes crude works when fancy doesn't, Captain Chen said. We've been monitoring your communications and tracking the swarm's movement patterns. They're hitting your outer defense line at Grid 7 right now, correct? Yes, but that position is heavily fortified with our most advanced shield generators and plasma artillery. If you're thinking of engaging them there, we're not thinking about it, Chen interrupted. We're doing it. Indomitable and her battle group are moving to intercept. We'll conduct reconnaissance in force and see how these things react to our approach. The transmission ended before Keth 7 could protest. Within hours, the first engagement reports began coming in, and they made no sense at all. The human ships are firing solid projectiles, reported the sensor operator, disbelief clear in his voice. Metallic slugs accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. No energy signatures, no exotic matter, just metal moving very fast. And the swarm's response? Keth 7 asked. They're confused, sir. Their adaptive algorithms seem to be struggling. Several swarm units have been destroyed outright by direct kinetic impact. The survivors are trying to adapt, but they keep adjusting for energy-based attacks that aren't coming. More reports followed. The humans were using nuclear weapons, but not in any way the galactic species recognized. Instead of clean antimatter or controlled fusion, they were using what could only be described as controlled explosions. Dirty, inefficient, and absolutely devastating against an enemy that expected sophisticated energy manipulation. Captain Chen is requesting permission to board damaged swarm vessels for analysis, Commander Vex reported. Board them? Keth 7 was horrified. That's suicide. The swarm bioships are filled with toxic atmosphere and adaptive defenses. No living being could survive inside one. The humans seem to think they can, Vex replied. They're saying something about environmental suits and acceptable risk levels. The next report was even more disturbing. Human soldiers had actually entered a damaged swarm vessel and were fighting the creatures inside using what their reports called projectile weapons and high explosives. The biological horrors that could adapt to energy weapons and quantum attacks were apparently unprepared for humans with guns and grenades. This is Sergeant Rodriguez. Echo Squad, came a transmission from inside the swarm ship. We've secured the forward sections. These things are tough, but they don't seem to know what to do when you just shoot them with bullets. Moving to plant charges in what looks like their main power coupling. Sergeant, this is Command. Captain Chen's voice responded. What's your environmental status? Atmosphere is toxic, temperature is about 40 degrees too hot, and something in here is giving off radiation that would probably kill most species. Standard Tuesday for us, ma'am. Charges planted and we're moving to extraction point. Keth 7 listened to this exchange with growing amazement. The humans were casually operating in conditions that would be lethal to most galactic species, and they were treating it as routine. The battle continued for 6 hours. When it ended, the swarm force that had been advancing steadily through the galaxy for months had been stopped cold. More than stopped. They had been driven back, their lead elements destroyed or fleeing in apparent confusion. Captain Chen's voice came over the communication system again. Ambassador Keth 7, this is Indomitable. We've completed initial engagement with hostile forces. Tactical assessment. They're dangerous, but they're not used to opponents who fight dirty. We're going to need more data on their movement patterns and breeding cycles. Breeding cycles? Keth-7 asked weakly. You can't kill an infestation by just fighting the soldiers, Chen explained matter-of-factly. You have to find the nest and destroy it. My biowarfare specialists are analyzing the samples we collected. They think they can develop something that will target the swarm's reproductive systems. Biowarfare? You mean biological weapons? Commander Vex looked shocked. Such things have been banned by Galactic Convention for centuries. There was a pause before Chen responded. Ambassador, these things are trying to wipe out all intelligent life in the galaxy. I'm not really concerned about fighting fair. Are you? Keth-7 realized that the humans approached warfare with the same mindset they approached survival, by using whatever worked, regardless of whether it was elegant or civilized. The galactic species had tried to fight the swarm according to the rules of civilized warfare, using approved weapons and accepted tactics. The humans had no such limitations. Captain Chen, Keth-7 said slowly, what do you need from us? Intelligence data, supply lines, and coordinate with any other forces you have left. We're going to take this fight to them, but we'll need local support. Oh, an ambassador? Yes? You might want to warn the other survivors that our methods are going to seem pretty extreme. We're not like the other species you've worked with. We don't fight wars to make a point or follow rules. We fight wars to win them. As the human fleet began coordinating with the refugee forces, Keth-7 realized that everything was about to change. For the first time since the swarm appeared, they had an ally that might actually have a chance. The question was whether the galaxy would survive being saved by the humans. The war changed completely once the humans arrived, and Ambassador Keth-7 wasn't sure if he was witnessing salvation or madness. 3 weeks after first contact, human forces were operating across 17 star systems, and their methods continued to shock the galactic survivors. The carefully planned, technology-dependent warfare that had failed against the swarm was replaced by something the humans called adaptive chaos. I still don't understand how they're winning, Commander Vex said, reviewing the latest battle reports. Look at this engagement at Tau Ceti. The swarm had adapted to our plasma weapons, our quantum disruptors, even our antimatter charges. Then the humans arrived and started using, what do they call them? Crowbars? Keth-7 studied the footage from the battle. Human soldiers in heavy armor were indeed using simple metal bars to attack swarm creatures that had proven immune to advanced energy weapons. When the creatures adapted to the crowbars, the humans switched to hammers. When they adapted to hammers, the humans used their bare hands. It's not about the weapons, he realized. It's about the unpredictability. The swarm can adapt to any specific threat, but they can't adapt to opponents who keep changing their entire approach. The most disturbing example was happening right now in the Kepler system. Marine Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez had volunteered to lead a boarding party into a swarm hive ship the size of a small moon. The mission briefing had been terrifyingly simple. Get inside, find the central coordination node, and destroy it. Rodriguez, this is command, came Captain Chen's voice over the communication system. What's your status? We're inside the hive, Captain, Rodriguez responded. The audio was filled with sounds of combat, explosions, weapon fire, and something that sounded like power tools. These things keep adapting to our rifles, so we've switched to shotguns. When they adapted to shotguns, we went to flamethrowers. Now we're using plasma cutters from the engineering kit. Plasma cutters? Commander Vex looked confused. Those are construction tools, not weapons. Everything's a weapon if you use it right, Rodriguez replied cheerfully. My demolitions expert just figured out how to make improvised explosives from their own biomass. These things might be smart, but they sure didn't expect us to turn their own guts into grenades. Keth-7 watched the tactical display as the human boarding party moved deeper into the hive ship. Where other species would have used precision strikes and careful planning, the humans seemed to be making up their strategy as they went along. When they encountered a passage too narrow for their equipment, they blew a hole in the wall. When they found a sealed door, they cut through it with industrial tools. Most shocking of all, they seemed to be enjoying themselves. Contact front, Rodriguez called out. Big ones this time. Looks like they've adapted to projectile weapons and thermal attacks. Switching to, kinetic persuasion. What's kinetic persuasion? Asked a voice that Keth-7 recognized as Lieutenant Zhang, the human explosives expert. Hitting them with really big hammers, Rodriguez explained. Thompson, break out the sledgehammers. Williams, you've got the crowbar. Jackson, see if you can find something heavy to throw at them. The audio dissolved into chaos as the humans engaged massive swarm creatures using construction equipment as weapons. Somehow, impossibly, it was working. The creatures that had shrugged off quantum weapons were being destroyed by humans with sledgehammers. How is this possible? Commander Vex whispered. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the human xenobiologist who had been studying captured swarm specimens, appeared on the communication screen. She looked exhausted but excited. I think I understand what's happening, she said. The swarm's adaptation mechanism is incredibly sophisticated, but it's designed to counter technological threats. Energy patterns, molecular structures, quantum fluctuations, they can analyze and neutralize all of that within minutes. But, Keth 7 prompted, but they can't adapt to pure physical force applied in random ways by opponents who don't follow any logical combat doctrine. When Sergeant Rodriguez hits a swarm creature with a sledgehammer, there's no technology to analyze. It's just kinetic energy applied through crude leverage. The creature's adaptation systems keep waiting for a pattern to emerge, but Rodriguez never uses the same technique twice. Dr. Harper pulled up a data chart. Look at this engagement record. In the span of 1 hour, human forces used conventional weapons, improvised explosives, construction tools, hand-to-hand combat, and at one point something they called aggressive mechanical persuasion with a wrench. The swarm's neural network is literally overloading, trying to adapt to opponents who seem to invent new fighting methods every few minutes. The tactical situation was improving across all fronts, but not in ways that made sense to the galactic survivors. Human units were winning battles by refusing to fight them the same way twice. When energy weapons stopped working, they used projectiles. When projectiles stopped working, they used blades. When blades stopped working, they used blunt objects. When blunt objects stopped working, they used their hands and feet. Rodriguez here, came the sergeant's voice again. We've reached the central chamber. This thing is huge, looks like some kind of biological computer the size of a building. Permission to apply percussive maintenance? What's percussive maintenance? Captain Chen asked. Hitting it until it stops working, ma'am. Granted. Make sure you clear the area first. What followed was the sound of massive explosions mixed with what could only be described as construction work. The humans weren't just destroying the hive ship's central node. They were dismantling it piece by piece using tools meant for building things, not destroying them. Target eliminated, Rodriguez reported 20 minutes later. Used a combination of shaped charges, plasma cutters, and a really big hammer. The hive is going dark. Requesting extraction. As the human boarding party returned to their ships, Keth 7 reviewed the overall strategic situation. In 3 weeks, human forces had accomplished what the combined might of galactic civilization had failed to do in months. They had stopped the swarm's advance and begun pushing them back, but the cost was becoming clear. The humans were operating in conditions that would kill other species, using methods that violated every principle of civilized warfare, and taking casualties that would be considered unacceptable by galactic standards. Captain Chen, Keth 7 called. I've been reviewing your casualty reports. Your people are taking significant losses. Chen's response was matter of fact. That's war, Ambassador. People get hurt. People die. But we're still here, and the swarm is retreating. I'll take those odds. But surely there must be a way to minimize the risks. Ambassador, Chen interrupted gently. We come from a world where everything is trying to kill us. Our weather, our animals, our diseases, even our plants. We learned a long time ago that sometimes you have to accept risk to survive. The other species in your galaxy, they've been safe for so long they've forgotten how to fight for their lives. Dr. Harper added, the psychological profiles are interesting. Human soldiers show stress responses that peak during combat, then return to baseline quickly afterward. Most galactic species show prolonged trauma from combat situations that we consider routine. Are you saying, Commander Vex asked slowly, that humans are naturally adapted for warfare? Not warfare exactly, Dr. Harper replied. Survival under extreme conditions. It just happens that those same adaptations make us very effective in combat situations. As if to prove her point, Rodriguez's voice came over the communication system again. Command, this is Rodriguez. The hive ship is completely dead, but we've got good news. We captured one of their coordination modules intact. Dr. Harper, you're going to love this thing. It's like a biological computer that thinks it's smarter than everyone else. Should be fun to take apart. Keth-7 realized that the humans weren't just winning the war. They were enjoying it. Not the violence itself, but the challenge, the problem-solving, the chance to test themselves against impossible odds. For the first time since the swarm appeared, the galaxy had hope. But that hope came with a price, accepting that sometimes salvation arrived in forms that civilized beings weren't prepared to understand. The humans were winning, but they were also changing everything about how galactic civilization thought about conflict, survival, and what it meant to fight for their lives. 2 months into the war, something unprecedented happened that surprised even the humans. The other species began to learn. Ambassador Keth-7 watched from the command center as mixed species units conducted joint operations against swarm positions. What he saw would have been impossible to imagine before the humans arrived. Nexari crystal warriors fighting alongside human marines, luminal energy beings coordinating with human pilots, and Vorthan engineers working with human demolitions experts. Keth Prime, this is Strike Team 7, came a transmission from the battle zone around Arcturus Station. The voice belonged to Zalthek, a Nexari warrior whose crystalline structure had been modified with human-designed armor plating. Go ahead, Strike Team 7, Keth-7 responded. We have successfully penetrated the swarm defensive perimeter using the human tactic called breaching and clearing. The human Staff Sergeant Vasquez has taught us something called covering fire and tactical advancement under pressure. We are preparing to assault the main hive structure. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez's voice joined the communication. Ambassador, these crystal folks are quick learners. Southek just figured out how to use his natural energy discharge as a suppressing weapon, while his squad moves to flanking positions. It's not pretty, but it's effective. Keth-7 had been following Vasquez's career with fascination and horror. The human sergeant had been assigned to train mixed species units in what the humans called ground combat tactics. Her methods were unorthodox by galactic standards, but they worked. The key, Vasquez had explained during one of her training sessions, is to stop thinking about fighting like it's a science. Start thinking about it like it's art. Ugly, practical art where the only thing that matters is going home alive. The transformation of the galactic survivors had been remarkable. Species that had relied on technological superiority for thousands of years were learning to fight with improvised weapons and crude tactics. More importantly, they were learning to think like humans. Vasquez here, came the sergeant's voice from another part of the battlefield. I've got a luminal unit that wants to try something crazy. They think they can overload their energy matrices to create what they're calling chaos resonance. It should disrupt swarm adaptation algorithms by producing random energy patterns. Is it safe? Asked the luminal commander, a being of pure energy named Bright Star Dancing. Probably not, Vasquez admitted cheerfully, but neither is letting the swarm eat the galaxy. Your choice, Bright Star? Then we will attempt this chaos resonance, the luminal replied. As you humans say, nothing ventured, nothing gained. The battle that followed demonstrated how much the galactic species had changed. The luminals created wild, unpredictable energy patterns that confused the swarm's adaptation systems. The Nexari used their crystal formations to create improvised fortifications and weapons. The Vorthans applied their engineering skills to building traps and defensive positions using salvaged materials. But the most significant change was psychological. The species that had once retreated, in the face of superior force, were now advancing into danger because they had learned what humans had always known. Sometimes the only way out is through. Target eliminated, reported Zalthek an hour later. The swarm hive has been destroyed using a combination of luminal energy discharge, Nexari crystal resonance, and human explosives. Sergeant Vasquez calls this a mixed bag approach. Good work, Strike Team 7, Keth-7 replied. Return to base for debrief and medical evaluation. What he heard next would have been unthinkable before the humans arrived. Medical evaluation unnecessary, Zalthek responded. Minor damage to crystal matrix but still combat effective. Requesting assignment to next target. It was a purely human response, shrugging off injuries that would have sidelined other species and asking for more combat. The crystalline warrior had learned more than human tactics. He had learned the human mindset. Dr. Harper joined Keth-7 in the command center, carrying a datapad filled with her latest research. The psychological changes are fascinating, she said. We're not just teaching them to fight differently. We're teaching them to think differently about risk, about survival, about what's acceptable loss. Is that a good thing? Keth 7 asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. It's a necessary thing, Dr. Harper replied. The swarm represents an existential threat that can't be defeated with civilized methods. Your species evolved in safe environments where cooperation and technological advancement were the keys to survival. Humans evolved where the key to survival was adaptability and willingness to take risks. She pulled up a holographic display showing brain scans of various species. Look at these neural patterns. Before training with humans, the galactic species showed stress responses that peaked when faced with danger and remained elevated for extended periods. After training, their responses are starting to match human patterns. High stress during immediate danger, followed by rapid recovery. They're becoming more like humans, Keth 7 observed. In the ways that matter for survival, yes, but they're also teaching us things. The Nexari showed us how to use crystalline resonance to amplify our weapon systems. The Luminals taught us energy manipulation techniques that we're incorporating into our shield generators. The Vorthans, well, they've redesigned half our equipment to be more efficient. A new transmission interrupted their conversation. This time it was Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka, calling from deep space where she was leading a reconnaissance mission behind swarm lines. Command, this is Recon 7. We've located what appears to be a major swarm breeding facility. It's heavily defended, but we think we can take it out. Captain Chen's voice responded immediately. Negative, Recon 7. That facility is too heavily defended for your current force strength. Return to base and we'll plan a larger assault. Ma'am, with respect, I think we can do this. I've got a mixed species team here, and we've come up with a plan that's crazy enough to work. The swarm won't expect an attack from a force this small, and we've learned some tricks they haven't adapted to yet. There was a long pause before Chen responded. Tanaka, define crazy enough to work. Well, the Luminals think they can create a massive energy discharge that will blind the facility's sensors for about 10 minutes. The Nexari can use their crystal formations to create a tunnel through the asteroid field. The Vorthans have figured out how to turn our remaining nuclear warheads into shaped charges, and I can fly the ship manually through their defenses. Manually? Without computer assistance? Yes, ma'am. Humans are still better than computers at making last-second decisions. The swarm's defense systems are designed to track predictable flight patterns. I can fly unpredictably. Keth 7 listened to this exchange with amazement. A few months ago, the idea of a small mixed-species team attempting to assault a major swarm facility would have been suicide. Now it sounded like a reasonable tactical option. You understand this is essentially a suicide mission? Chen asked. Ma'am, everything we do is essentially a suicide mission. That's what war means. But if we can take out that breeding facility, we'll save millions of lives. Seems like a fair trade. Dr. Harper leaned over to Keth 7. That's pure human thinking right there. Risk assessment based on potential benefits rather than potential costs. Captain Chen's response came after another long pause. Approved, but I want constant communication. And if things go bad, you abort immediately. We can't afford to lose experienced mixed-species teams. Roger that, Command. Recon 7 beginning approach. Over the next 6 hours, Keth 7 watched as Tanaka's small team accomplished something that should have been impossible. They infiltrated the heavily defended facility, planted their improvised explosives, and escaped while the entire complex collapsed behind them. The victory was significant. But what impressed Keth 7 most was how the different species had worked together. The Luminals had provided energy support. The Nexari had created defensive positions. The Vorthans had handled technical challenges. And the humans had provided leadership and tactical flexibility. Most importantly, all of them had been willing to risk their lives for the greater good. Strike Team 7 requesting new assignment, came Zaltek's voice again. We have identified another swarm position that appears vulnerable to combined species assault. Keth 7 realized that the war had changed all of them. The galactic species were no longer refugees waiting to be saved. They had become soldiers, willing to fight for their survival using methods they would have considered barbaric just months earlier. And somehow, in learning to fight like humans, they had also learned what it meant to truly live. The final battle began at dawn on what humans called Tuesday, though the concept of weekdays seemed meaningless when facing the end of galactic civilization. Admiral Sarah, Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, looking at the tactical display that showed the swarm's primary hive nexus. The structure was enormous, a biomechanical construct the size of Earth's moon, pulsing with dark energy and surrounded by thousands of defensive organisms. Intelligence suggested it was the central coordination point for the entire swarm invasion. "Final fleet count, Commander Morrison?" she asked. 14 human battle groups, 8 Nexari crystal formations, 5 luminal energy squadrons, and 12 mixed-species assault units, Morrison replied. Total force strength approximately 400 ships and 50,000 personnel. Chen nodded grimly. The fleet represented everything that remained of galactic civilization's military capacity. If they failed here, there would be no second chance. "Admiral," came Ambassador Keth Seven's voice from the command center. "The Council of Survivors wishes to express their gratitude for everything humanity has done." "If this assault fails, it won't fail," Chen interrupted. "Not because we're better than the swarm, but because we're too stubborn to quit. That's what you get when you ask Deathworlders for help." The assault plan was typically human in its simplicity. Ram the primary fleet into the hive nexus while smaller units created diversions. Board the structure, fight their way to the central core, and destroy it from the inside. No elegant technology, no sophisticated strategies, just controlled violence applied with maximum efficiency. All units. "This is Admiral Chen. Execute Operation Last Stand." The combined fleet moved forward, and for the first time in the war, the swarm seemed ready for them. The defensive organisms had adapted to human tactics over months of combat. Energy shields deflected kinetic weapons. Adaptive armor absorbed explosive damage. Biomechanical fighters countered human unpredictability with their own chaotic patterns. "They've learned," Morrison observed as the first wave of attacks met heavy resistance. "Good," Chen replied. "Makes this more interesting. All units implement Protocol Chaos." What followed was the most insane battle in galactic history. Human ships fired everything they had: kinetic weapons, nuclear missiles, experimental plasma cannons, and in one memorable case, a cargo container full of scrap metal accelerated to relativistic speeds. When conventional weapons failed, they used improvised ones. When improvised weapons failed, they used their ships as weapons. The luminals created massive energy discharges that overloaded swarm sensors. The Nexari formed crystalline formations that acted as both shields and weapons platforms. The mixed-species units used tactics that changed faster than the swarm could adapt. But it wasn't enough. The hive nexus was too well defended. Its adaptive systems too sophisticated. For every swarm unit they destroyed, 2 more appeared. For every tactic that worked, the swarm developed 3 counters. "Admiral, we're taking heavy losses," Morrison reported. "Casualty rates approaching 60%. Chen watched as ships disappeared from the tactical display, each one representing hundreds of lives lost. The math was simple. They were losing this battle and they were running out of time. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Implement Operation Desperation." "Ma'am, that's not a real operation. It is now. All units abandon conventional tactics. Use whatever works. If you run out of ammunition, ram them. If your ship is disabled, evacuate to other vessels and keep fighting. We're not leaving until that thing is dead." The battle transformed into something that defied military logic. Ships with no weapons left used their engines as clubs. Crews from destroyed vessels transferred to other ships and kept fighting. Human Marines used boarding pods to assault swarm organisms, fighting them from the inside with whatever weapons they could find. Sergeant Rodriguez, whose boarding parties had become legendary throughout the fleet, led an assault on one of the Nexus's primary defensive nodes. "This is Echo Squad. We're inside the target. These things have adapted to our weapons, our explosives, and our tactics. Switching to Plan Z." "What's Plan Z?" asked his commanding officer. "Hit them with wrenches until they stop moving," Rodriguez replied matter-of-factly. "Williams, break out the toolbox. We're going old school." While the fleet fought desperately outside, Admiral Chen made a decision that would have horrified the galactic survivors if they had understood what she was planning. "Morrison, plot a collision course with the hive nexus. Full ramming speed. Admiral, the Indomitable can't survive that kind of impact." "I know. Signal the fleet to continue the assault without us. We're going to punch a hole in their defenses big enough for the boarding parties to get through." As the massive battleship accelerated toward the hive nexus, Chen opened a communication channel to the entire fleet. All units, this is Admiral Chen. The Indomitable is making a final approach to create a breach in the enemy's primary structure. Continue the mission. Make it count. The ship's impact was visible across the star system. The Indomitable, moving at significant relativistic speed, punched through the hive's outer defenses like a bullet through paper. The explosion that followed opened a massive crater in the biomechanical structure. Breach confirmed, came Rodriguez's voice from inside the hive. Admiral Chen's ship opened up the whole front face. We've got a clear path to the central core. What followed was the largest boarding action in history as thousands of soldiers from dozens of species fought their way through the hive's internal passages. They used every weapon they had, every tactic they had learned, and when those failed, they used their bare hands. The core chamber was a cathedral-sized space filled with biomechanical processing nodes that pulsed with alien intelligence. At its center was something that defied description, part machine, part organism, part something else entirely. It was the swarm's central mind, the thing that had coordinated the destruction of entire civilizations. Well, said Rodriguez, looking at the massive structure, that's definitely above my pay grade. But I've got explosives and it's got vital-looking parts. Seems like a solvable problem. As the assault teams placed their charges, the central mind spoke, not in words but in thoughts that somehow reached every soldier in the chamber. You do not understand what you are destroying. I was created to prune galactic civilization when it became stagnant, to ensure that intelligence did not grow weak through comfort and safety. I have served this purpose for millions of years. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, who had survived the crash of the Indomitable and fought her way to the core chamber, responded while arming her charges. Yeah, well, we're from a planet where everything tries to kill us on a daily basis. We don't get weak through comfort because we don't get comfort. Consider this a resignation letter. Your species is an anomaly, the mind continued. You evolved strength through adversity, adaptation through conflict. You are what the other species should have become. Maybe, Rodriguez said, setting the final charges, but they didn't have to become anything. They just had to survive long enough for us to show up. The explosions that followed weren't elegant or sophisticated. They were human explosives, crude and effective, designed to destroy rather than disable. As the core chamber collapsed and the hive mind died, its final transmission was something like surprise. It had never encountered a species that viewed existential threats as Tuesday morning problems. 6 months later, Ambassador Keth 7 stood in the new headquarters of the Galactic Alliance on Earth. The name change from Confederation to Alliance reflected more than just politics. It represented a fundamental shift in how the galaxy approached the concept of survival. The integration process is proceeding better than expected, he reported to the Alliance Council. The Nexari have established 3 new colonies using human defensive protocols. The Luminals are teaching energy manipulation to human engineers. The Vorthans are collaborating on ship designs that combine human durability with galactic efficiency. But the most significant change was harder to quantify. The species that had once relied entirely on technology and cooperation had learned something else, the willingness to fight for their existence. They had learned to be dangerous when necessary, to take risks when required, and to never give up when survival was at stake. Captain Chen, now Admiral Chen, had survived the crash of the Indomitable and now commanded the Alliance military. Her philosophy had become the unofficial motto of the new galactic order. Sometimes the only way to save civilization is to be willing to lose it. Dr. Harper had established the Institute for Survival Studies, where researchers from dozens of species studied what she called adaptive resilience, the ability to thrive under adverse conditions rather than simply endure them. And throughout the galaxy, on worlds that had been devastated by the swarm, mixed species colonies were rebuilding using principles that combined the best of galactic